Speed and performance are crucial these days when it comes to getting people to take action. In a study by Google, they found that as page load time goes from 1 second to 5 seconds, the probability of a bounce increases by 90%. In this video, we'll cover some tips for avoiding that by making sure your pages are built in a way that will help them load quickly. The 5 things I'll cover are optimizing your images, optimizing your code, optimizing the hosting environment, testing AMP pages, and continually testing and monitoring your pages. Let's look at each point in more detail, starting with the first one. Optimize the images. This is something you should do for every landing page you build, even if the builder you're using claims to do it for you automatically. I recommend running your images through a free tool such as compressor.io, or if you're using WordPress, you can install an image optimization plugin such as Smush Pro. There are many other image optimization plugins and tools out there, so just try to find one that you like. The idea is to remove all of the excess junk from the images while not sacrificing the image quality. The image size itself also matters. Avoid uploading supersized images onto your landing pages. First, you should resize them, shooting for just 2 or 3 times the display size in order to have your images and graphics display well on Retina screens. Anything larger than 3 times the display size is just overkill in my opinion and may be weighing down your pages. Next up, optimize the code. Now, this is something you may not have a lot of control over if you're using a dedicated landing page tool like Unbounce or Instapage or Landingy. They'll do this for you as best as they can. But if you're working within WordPress, you'll have a lot of control over how your code is deployed. And a common tactic is to minify your code, where you're basically compressing it together to save space. This example of CSS code shows what it looks like before and after that process. My third tip is to optimize the hosting environment. Again, this is something you'll have more control over if you're building within WordPress or completely from scratch on your own servers. If you're using a dedicated landing page builder like Unbounce or Instapage or Landingy, this again is done for you, and it's also done pretty well in most cases. The 2 biggest things you can do is ensure your host is using a content delivery network or CDN, and also using some type of page caching protocol. A CDN helps distribute your content all around the world so that people who may visit your landing page from Asia will be served from a network that is close to them, which cuts down on load times. If you have concerns about whether or not your host is using a CDN, or if they offer one for you to set up, just ask them. The same goes for caching. With WordPress, there are a lot of plugins that do this for you, including WP Rocket and W3 Total Cache. For many of the dedicated landing page builders, this is a top priority for them. Unbounce, for instance, boasts that they use 5 global data centers that serve your pages globally on their CDN, and they also leverage browser caching and much more. My 4th tip is to test AMP pages. If you're not familiar with AMP or Accelerated Mobile Pages, it's an open source project that's all about page speed and creating a new format for mobile pages that load far more quickly than what's traditionally available. While it's not yet supported on every site or by every browser, it's becoming much more popular by the day and has a huge backing from Google. AMP pages aren't coded like traditional web pages. They're built with 3 core components. According to documentation from Unbounce, which has been reporting on AMP for years, the 3 components that go into AMP pages are AMP HTML, AMP JavaScript, and the AMP cache. AMP HTML. This is the new format of HTML that has AMP-specific tags and custom elements. Though it's similar to regular HTML coding, there are some restrictions that allow you to have an AMP page perform much more reliably than a traditional page. AMP JavaScript. Just like AMP HTML, AMP JavaScript has custom tags that are focused on resource loading and ensure faster rendering of AMP web pages. And AMP Cache. AMP Cache is a proxy-based server that's created specifically to work with AMP pages. It allows your pages to be preloaded efficiently from the same location, while also optimizing the content for speed in the background while it's loading. There are a lot of advantages to using AMP pages, but there are some downsides too. For instance, you won't be able to use all of the elements that you're used to. Things like custom JavaScript and custom styling is still severely limited in many cases, but sometimes the trade-off in page speed is worth it. In the graphic on this slide, you can see a side-by-side comparison of an AMP page versus a regular landing page loading at the same time, and you can clearly see the speed difference here. If you want to learn more about AMP, I encourage you to check out the official website at amp.dev. And if you want to start building AMP landing pages, some of the most popular landing page platforms are already offering this capability on some of their plans, including Unbounce and Instapage. For WordPress, there are also a number of plugins you can use to create or optimize AMP pages, such as the AMP for WP plugin and the official AMP plugin. Lastly, my final tip regarding speed and performance optimization is to continually test and monitor your pages. You can do this in a number of ways. You can use Google Analytics to check the page timings report and see how it's affecting your overall conversions. You can review session recordings via Hotjar and see if pages are loading quickly on a user-by-user basis. You can set up a free monitoring tool like FreshPing to continually monitor each page or URL for downtime. And you can run a speed test anytime by using a tool like GTmetrix, which will offer improvements for what you can do to increase performance. Regarding one of those points about the Google Analytics page timings report, this is an often overlooked feature inside Google Analytics. Simply go to Behavior, Site Speed, Page Timings, and then click on the DOM Timings tab under the Explore tab, as seen here, and you'll see a wealth of information that is very helpful. The most useful metric here is the average document interactive time in seconds. Document interactive time is when the page is still loading, but the user can begin to interact with the page. This metric measures the amount of time in seconds it takes to get to this interactive point from the start of the timeline. The document interactive time is really useful because, as web consultant Eric Mobley says, quote, "The time it takes for a page to be interactive has a huge impact on perceived performance and user experience as a whole. For example, a website that becomes interactive and fully loads at precisely the same time, let's say 6 seconds, will be perceived as much slower than a site that becomes interactive at 3 seconds and fully loads at 8 seconds. Even though the later site takes 2 seconds longer to load, it becomes interactive 3 seconds sooner. So the perceived performance is much better. So that's why I encourage you to pay attention to the document interactive time." Well, that's it for speed and performance. In the next video, we'll switch things up and look at e-commerce landing pages and how you can optimize an e-commerce purchase funnel. I'll see you there.